In the silent frost of winter's garden, a clue awaits beneath frozen blooms. Welcome to Detective Echoes. Share where you're tuning in from. Your insights light our path. Let's step into the gardener's secret. It was one of those damp, colourless mornings peculiar to London January, when even the smoke from the chimneys hung low and sullen, as if unwilling to rise against the thick winter air. I had resumed my usual post by the hearth in our Baker Street, lodgings, newspaper in hand, the sound of the coals moving in the grate being the only intrusion upon the quiet. Holmes sat in his chair opposite, his long fingers curled under his chin, his eyes closed, not asleep, but in that strange meditative state which he often assumed before the storm of action. "You seem agitated, Watson," he said without opening. His eyes. "Restless? On the contrary, I find the calm rather welcome. Yet you have turned this page 3 times, and I didn't read a word." I smiled in spite of myself. "Well, maybe I'm restless. There's little in the papers. No sensational murders, no international jewel thief, not even a wayward goose with a gem in its crop." Holmes opened one eye. "Ah, the adventure of the blue carbuncle. You're getting nostalgic, Watson. Come on, admit, you're yearning for another riddle. No more than you, Holmes. I noticed you haven't picked up your violin all morning. That's often the surest sign that your mind is hungry for a challenge." He gave a dry chuckle and stood up from his chair. "Then let's hope Providence grants your wish." As if our conversation had summoned him, there was a measured knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson's voice followed. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes." "Bring him in," Holmes called, immediately alert. The door opened to reveal a tall, pale man in his 50s, dressed with the modest care of a respectable servant. His coat and boots were damp, and the brim of his hat was dripping with slush. He held a soft leather bag in both gloved hands and looked around with a mixture of apprehension and suppressed urgency. "Come in, sir," said Holmes, pointing to the empty chair by the fire. "Your overcoat is soaked. Let us take it off for you." The man sat down, carefully placing the satchel at his feet. "Mr. Holmes, I apologize for this unannounced intrusion. My name is Edwin Talmage. I am head gardener at Ferndale House in Surrey." "Indeed," Holmes replied, his eyes already fixed on the man's hands. "You came direct to London this morning. Your boots show fresh earth from the Ferndale greenhouses, but the heels are worn askew, the sign of long walks on gravel paths. Your profession is unmistakable." The gardener blinked. "Yes, sir. Quite true in every way. What brings a country gardener to my door in the middle of winter?" Talmage hesitated, then pulled a small linen pouch from his satchel. He pulled out a single flower, white, delicate, and in full bloom despite the cold. I leaned forward, puzzled. "A camellia." "Not quite," Holmes murmured. "Note the texture of the petals, Watson. This flower is not a common variety." Talmage nodded. "It's a Viceroy's snow camellia, the only one of its kind in Europe, as far as I know, a hybrid that Lord Ferndale himself grew before his death last spring. And this morning, Mr. Holmes, it flowered." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "It's really strange, but I don't see the mystery. Botanists sometimes produce marvels of timing." "Forgive me, sir, that's not why I came. It's where the flower bloomed that has us all in a state." "Ah," said Holmes, folding his hands. "Now we come to the point." "In the south greenhouse," Talmage explained, "in the bed of earth where Lord Ferndale was found dead 9 months ago. That section has been sealed off since. No one has touched it, not even me. It was supposed to lie fallow out of respect. Yet when I opened it this morning to check for frost damage, I found the flower, just one, and buried beneath the soil." He hesitated, his lips trembling. "Yes?" Holmes asked softly. "Another body." There was a long silence. Even Holmes looked momentarily disconcerted. I scribbled in my notebook, more out of habit than insight, while my mind whirled with questions. Holmes leaned forward. "You say the greenhouse was sealed?" "Yes, Mr. Holmes, locked and locked. I alone had the key, and the discovery was made this morning. I opened it shortly after dawn." "And you didn't tell anyone else?" "No one but you, sir. I locked it again and came straight to London." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, we need to prepare for a trip." "You mean in Surrey?" "Yes. There's something about this story. A flower unexpectedly blooming where a man died. And now another dead man is discovered in the same soil. That seems to me more than coincidental. Mr. Talmadge, you were wise to come. I hope no news of this has reached the local police?" "Not yet, sir." "Good. Let's leave it at that. One whisper, in the wrong ear, and we risk muddling the waters before they're even tested." I closed my notebook and stood up. "Holmes, surely you can't believe the two deaths are linked?" "I don't think so, Watson," said Holmes, putting on his Inverness cloak. "Suspect. And when nature seems to contradict itself, when flowers bloom against the season and death returns to a once silent grave, then we must indeed be very careful." We descended the stairs and entered the grey street, the gardener behind us. I couldn't help thinking about that ghostly flower emerging from the uncultivated ground. Whatever lay beneath the greenhouse soil, I sensed it wasn't simply rot, but the seeds of something far more sinister. The car rocked gently beneath us as we drove through the icy countryside towards Surrey, the sky leaden with unfallen snow and the trees as barren as bones. Holmes, wrapped in his travelling coat, stared out of the window with that vacant stare that so often hid fierce mental activity. I had long since given up trying to interrupt such moods, knowing that any intrusion might derail the threads he was following in his mind. Opposite him, Edwin Talmadge sat stiffly, his gloved hands clasped over the satchel that had not left him since entering Baker Street. Although he had spoken little since we left, his eyes betrayed the tension of a man carrying not only responsibility, but perhaps the weight of an unspoken terror. I started on a new page of my notebook, writing down the little information we have. Lord Ferndale, who died in the spring of last year, was found dead in the south greenhouse. Greenhouse sealed since, key in possession of the head gardener. A rare hybrid flower, believed to be dormant or dead, had bloomed out of season. Second body was discovered in the same flower bed months later. "Holmes," I ventured finally, "it's a curious question, certainly, but couldn't the second death have been accidental? Perhaps a vagrant stumbled into the park and met with misfortune. The warmth of the greenhouse might—" "No vagrant, Watson," Holmes interrupted, without turning away from the window. "Mr. Talmadge, when you found the second body, were there any signs of forced entry?" "None at all, Mr. Holmes. The windows were unbroken, the bolts rusty but firm. Only my key could have opened it, and I've kept it in my own desk drawer since spring." Holmes nodded. "And the body? Was it fresh?" Talmadge hesitated, then said somberly, "It wasn't. From the looks of it, the man had been dead for at least a few weeks, maybe longer. Was he dressed?" "Fully dressed, sir. I didn't recognize his face or his attire." "Interesting," Holmes murmured. "That already tells us something." I leaned forward, unable to contain my curiosity. "What does this tell us?" "The killer had access to the greenhouse and time to arrange a burial in a supposedly sacred and quiet place," Holmes said. "This was not an impulsive act, but one committed with the assurance that no one would look there again." We fell silent again, as the landscape unfolded into a grey stillness around us. It was nearly noon when the car finally passed through tall iron gates and approached a long gravel drive, flanked by leafless yew trees. Ferndale House rose beyond, an austere Georgian heritage stone building, its shuttered windows and smokeless chimneys giving it a gloomy appearance. We were greeted at the side entrance by a footman who glanced nervously at Talmadge before showing us to a modest parlour with faded tapestries and a long-standing clock that ticked the hour with slow, deliberate ticks. "Is the house aware of your discovery?" Holmes asked the gardener in a low voice. "I only informed Mrs. Armitage, the housekeeper," Talmadge replied. "She's been here almost as long as I have, loyal to the family." "Even loyalty can break under pressure," Holmes murmured before turning to me. "Watson, accompany Mr. Talmadge to the greenhouse. I'd like to examine the body before any further disturbance. In the meantime, I will speak with the housekeeper and obtain all possible details about the late Lord Ferndale's last days." Talmadge led me through the back garden, a desolate space in winter, the flower beds skeletal and edged with ice. A path of flat stones took us to the southern edge of the estate, where the greenhouse stood half-shrouded in mist. Its frame was cast iron, fashionably curved, its panes slightly yellowed by time and condensation. He unlocked the door with a shaky hand. The hinges creaked as we entered. A wave of damp, earthy air hit us, unexpectedly warm, filled with the sickening scent of silt and moss. The interior was dark, the pale winter sun filtering through the darkened windows, and there at the far end a rectangular plot had been cleared of brush, the soil freshly turned. A tarp had been stretched over, the body a makeshift blanket. "I didn't move it," Talmadge said hoarsely. "Quite true." I knelt down and gently lifted the edge of the tarpaulin. The sight below made me recoil. The body, though partially rotten, was still identifiable as that of a middle-aged man, with a strong jaw and dark hair matted with dirt. His clothes were of good quality, though torn at the collar and sleeves. A curious object protruded slightly from his coat pocket, a notebook wrapped in waxed linen. I carefully removed it. "Have you looked into this?" I asked. Talmadge shook his head. "I dare not touch anything until you arrive." I opened the booklet and noticed that several pages were stained and water-damaged, but one page stood out. A sketch of the same flower Holmes had identified, a Viceroy snow camellia, along with a list of dates and initials. Most of the entries were cryptic. VB, December 3rd, MM, December 7th, and so on. Holmes arrived shortly after, striding purposefully into the greenhouse. He glanced at the body, then at the ground, bent down, and inhaled deeply near the roots of the blooming flower. "Do you detect the scent, Watson?" "Yes. Earthy, tangy, but with something spicy underneath." "Precisely. A trace of quicklime, if I'm not mistaken." He stood up. "The killer wanted to speed up the decomposition, but he overdid it. The chemical reaction created enough heat to stimulate the dormant flower's growth. Nature, it seems, has betrayed our murderer." He took the notebook from my hands and examined the notes. His eyes narrowed. "This isn't just a gardener's journal, these are coded meetings. And initials can be more dangerous than names." He turned to Talmadge. "Tell me, Mr. Talmadge, who in Lord Ferndale's household or circle could be associated with the initials VB, MM, or JC?" Talmadge frowned. "VB could be Miss Violet Bancroft, Lord Ferndale's niece. She resides here. MM, perhaps Martin Merriweather, the lawyer. But JC, I'm afraid I don't know." Holmes nodded. "That will do for now. We must be cautious, gentlemen. The flower may have bloomed in all innocence, but it reveals a much deeper rot beneath the surface." As we stepped out of the greenhouse and the cold settled over us once more, I looked at the flower still gently nodding its head in its deathbed. There was something unnatural about its beauty, an elegance that mocked the decadence that surrounded it. Holmes was already several steps ahead, his gait long and his expression grave. "The dead man knew something, Watson," he said. He came to reveal it, perhaps to blackmail him. But someone silenced him, and they chose the one place no one dared look, a tomb disguised as a garden. I glanced at my notes, my heart already pounding with the intricacies to come. There were suspects to meet, secrets to uncover, and an elusive truth buried as deep as the body in the ground. The parlour at Ferndale House was a dark room, with dark velvet curtains and ancestral oil portraits, whose stern gazes seemed to regard our presence with disapproval. Holmes stood before the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the low fire as if searching for patterns in the flickering embers. I sat by the window, notebook in hand, while Edwin Talmadge remained just outside, having withdrawn at Holmes's request. "Mrs. Armitage will join us shortly," Holmes said, turning to me. "But mind you, Watson, this is not merely an interview. We are, in fact, probing the depth of loyalty and the strain of fear. Watch her carefully." The door opened and the housekeeper entered. Mrs. Armitage was a slim woman in her 60s, with a rigid posture and a serious but not unkind expression. She wore the dark uniform of her station, and even though her hair was silver and pulled back in a tight bun, there was still a fierce intelligence behind her eyes. She curtsied without embellishment. "You sent for me, Mr. Holmes." "Indeed, Mrs. Armitage. Thank you for coming. I regret the disturbance in the house, but as Mr. Talmadge may have informed you, a matter of great concern has arisen. I understand a body was discovered in the south greenhouse, she said with remarkable calm. "A terrible case. You know, I presume that the greenhouse has been locked since Lord Ferndale's death?" "I am. Mr. Talmadge was very careful to seal it properly. His lordship's death shook him more than he cared to admit." "Can you recall the circumstances of that day?" Holmes asked. "Quarrels, visitors, irregularities?" She folded her hands. "His lordship was in good health, or so it seemed. He spent the morning reviewing the estate accounts, then retired to the greenhouse shortly after lunch. He did this often. It was his sanctuary. He was found sprawled among the flower beds 2 hours later. The doctor said it was his heart, and there was no sign of a struggle." "None that I saw. I helped get the doctor myself." Holmes studied his face. "Was he under pressure at the time? Financial problems? Threats?" Mrs. Armitage paused. "To my knowledge, no threats, sir. But his lordship was overwhelmed. His sister had died the previous year, and her daughter, Miss Violet Bancroft, had come to live here. I don't believe he ever fully recovered from his grief." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Was their relationship strained?" "I wouldn't say tense, Mr. Holmes, but distant. Miss Bancroft is independent and bookish. He cared about her, I'm sure, but they rarely spoke." Holmes paced thoughtfully. "And what about the household staff? Any recent departures or new additions?" "No. New staff since Lord Ferndale's death," she replied firmly. "We are now a small household, myself, Mr. Talmadge, the cook, and 2 maids. No footman, no valet. His lordship dismissed most of the staff last spring." "Financial reasons, I believe." Even though he never said it." Holmes paused. "You mentioned Violet Bancroft. I'd love to speak to her next. I'll send you a message." She nodded briskly, then added, "I hope you get justice, Mr. Holmes. His lordship deserved better than to be doubted in death." When she was gone, Holmes turned to me, his expression sharper. "A balanced woman, Watson, but no stranger to the habit of keeping secrets. Do you think she's lying?" "No lie, the setup, which is much more dangerous. She didn't flinch when we mentioned the new corpse, but her reaction to the greenhouse reopening was a little too measured. Do you suspect her of involvement?" "I suspect she knows more than she lets on." Moments later, there was a knock at the door and a young woman entered, slender, pale, and dressed in mourning grey despite the passing of the season. Violet Bancroft wore a quiet elegance, her dark hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat. She met Holmes's gaze not with fear, but with cold curiosity. "Did you want to see me?" "Yes, Miss Bancroft." "I'm Sherlock Holmes. Thank you for joining us. Please be seated." She did so without hesitation, folding her gloved hands in her lap. "I was told a body was found." "That's right. In the very greenhouse where your uncle was found dead. Do you remember that day?" His eyes darkened. "Yes. I had just returned from London. I had gone to meet Mr. Merriweather, our lawyer. Uncle Gregory had asked me to retrieve some legal papers." "Do you know what kind?" "Property documents. There was talk of changing the will." Holmes exchanged a look with me before continuing. "And did he make these changes?" She shook her head. "He died before anything was signed. As things stand, the estate is to be divided. One part in favor of his surviving cousin in Devon, one part held in trust until my marriage or my 30th birthday, whichever comes first." "A prudent arrangement," murmured Holmes. "Tell me, Miss Bancroft, do you know a man whose initials are J.C.?" She hesitated. No, I don't think so. Should I do it?" "Perhaps not. But the man found in the greenhouse was carrying a notebook. It contained references to several people, including yourself. He may have been keeping a record of your meetings. Has anyone recently come to visit you at Ferndale? Someone you met, in secret or without the house's knowledge?" Violet's composure faltered slightly. "I haven't received any secret visitors. I remain alone, Mr. Holmes." "Even loners leave footprints," he replied softly. "If you remember anything, even a name. You heard a lost letter. I urge you to speak up." She stood up. "If I think of anything useful, I'll let you know, but I'm afraid I've told you all I can." Holmes inclined his head. "Thank you." When she was gone, I exhaled. "She's hiding something." "Yes," Holmes said, "but not necessarily what." "We suspect. Did she lie about the initials?" "Not necessarily. It's just as likely she's protecting someone." He walked to the window and looked out at the bare gardens. "Consider this, Watson. The dead man in the greenhouse carried a coded ledger. He recorded the meetings, perhaps as evidence, perhaps as leverage. Talmadge insists the greenhouse was locked. So how did our corpse get there? Do you think someone in the house has a second key? Perhaps. Or the original was borrowed, copied, returned. Does this suggest premeditation?" Holmes nodded. "And trust. The killer assumed the body would never be found. And yet," I said, "a flower has bloomed." Holmes smiled weakly. "Nature has a way of betraying even the most intelligent plans." At that moment, Talmadge appeared at the door. "Pardon me, Mr. Holmes, but there is a man at the door. He says he has come from London. He won't give his name. He demands to speak with the head of the estate." Holmes's eyes glittered. "What did he say?" "He mentioned Lord Ferndale, and an unpaid debt." Holmes turned to me. "Shall we go, Watson?" "Gladly, as—" We walked toward the entrance. I couldn't help but feel the mystery thickening around us like fog coming in from the orchard path. A flower, a corpse, initials in a ledger, and now a menacing stranger at the door. Whatever was underground in Ferndale, we had only just begun to uncover the roots. The man waiting behind the frost-covered door was tall, wrapped in a charcoal overcoat that bore the faint sheen of city grime. His bowler hat was speckled with slush, and though his gloves were good leather, they had seen better years. He stood with a look of growing impatience, the kind of impatience peculiar to men accustomed to bluffing their way through doors that should remain locked. As Holmes and I approached, he looked at us with shrewd calculation, his lips set tightly. He was no stranger to confrontation, that much was certain. There was a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. Holmes needed no introduction. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," the man said with a curt nod. "I was hoping to meet you." You've run quite far, Holmes replied, wiping the snow with his backhand. From London to the Ferndale estate is no casual walk, and you did it without naming a name. The man exhaled sharply, a puff of white vapor escaping from him. Call me Jonas Cobb. That's all that matters, JC, I whispered instinctively. Holmes's expression remained unreadable. I don't suppose you came to admire the camellias, Mr. Cobb. Barely. Cobb's eyes turned to the house behind us. I came for what's mine. What is this? Payment. From a man who delivered it 9 months too late. Holmes crossed his arms. You are referring to Lord Ferndale. Cobb smirked. You say that as if you doubt that dead people can owe money. Holmes subtly gestured for us to walk, and we turned onto the gravel path that ran alongside the orchard, shielding our conversation from the view of the house. The trees stood in skeletal rows, the air around us silent except for the crunch of our boots. You'll have to be more specific, Holmes said. What was the nature of this debt? Information, Cobb said simply. I gave him information that could ruin his reputation. He wanted leverage, family, associates, finances, everything. I provided it. He promised compensation, never followed through. Interesting, said Holmes. And this arrangement, was it formal? Cobb scoffed. You think men like Ferndale put things in writing? No, it was agreed. But the real problem is that someone else did put it in writing. He patted his coat pocket. I had a partner. Younger, bolder. He kept a ledger, stupidly detailed. That's the real danger. Holmes stopped. Your partner, has he disappeared? Cobb didn't respond immediately, his jaw clenched. I haven't seen him in over a month. Last I heard, he said he was coming back to Ferndale to press the issue. He said he had one last card to play. Holmes looked at him for a moment. What was his name? Marshall Grew. Holmes nodded slowly. And what exactly did Crane threaten to reveal? Cobb hesitated. Ferndale's original will had been changed, radically, and some parties say more distant relatives wouldn't appreciate being cut out. Forged documents? No, Cobb said. Real ones, but secret. He never filed the revisions, too risky. But the content, they would change everything. We walked in silence for several steps. I could see the outline of the greenhouse in the distance through the trees. Holmes finally spoke. Crane's body was discovered this morning, buried in the greenhouse under a flower bed. Cobb's breath caught. Dead? Enough. Cobb shook his head. I told him to leave it alone. I told him it wasn't a game, fucking idiot. Holmes watched him carefully. And where were you 2 months ago? I was in Shoreditch. Ask around. I was working as a warehouse guard. I can prove it. You may need it. Scotland Yard will want statements. Cobb was pale now, shaken but not panicked. I didn't kill him, I swear. Perhaps, Holmes said, but someone had reasons to silence him. And if Crane took that ledger to Ferndale, then he was either betrayed or being followed. Cobb nodded grimly. The ledger, it's the key. Holmes turned to me. Watson, get the ledger from my bag in the study. I'll be quick. As I walked back toward the house, my thoughts swirling, I couldn't help but feel the net tightening. The story was no longer limited to the eccentricities of botany or the secrets of a deceased nobleman. It was broader now, deeper. It was about inheritance, deception, and perhaps revenge. When I returned with the water-stained notebook, Holmes had seated Cobb on a bench under a bare hawthorn tree. Holmes turned to the page we had examined earlier and handed it to him. These initials, VBMMJC, do you recognize them all now? Cobb studied the page. VB is Violet Bancroft. MM is Merriweather, the lawyer. JC, well, that's me. These dates, those are when Crane met us. So these are meetings arranged for negotiation? Holmes asked. Some were. Others were exchanges of documents, letters, evidence. Crane said Ferndale was getting nervous. He had stopped responding to direct contact. Crane wanted to force things. Holmes's fingers danced across the page. But look, at this entry. December. 12th VB plus mem circled. Any idea what that entails? Cobb narrowed his eyes. That's when Crane said he finally met the girl. He said she wasn't as naive as her uncle thought. Holmes's eyes glittered. So she knew about the will, or at least suspected changes. Maybe. Or it was used for leverage. Holmes stood up. Mr. Cobb, you will remain at Ferndale under surveillance. Do not speak to anyone unless I authorize it. I will ask Lestrade to assign an agent to follow you. Do you believe me? Cobb asked. I think you're afraid. And that makes you useful. Not trustworthy, just useful. We left him under the hawthorn tree, his figure hunched against the cold. Back inside the house, Holmes summoned Mrs. Armitage again, demanding a copy of the original. Will and all revisions known to the lawyer. She pursed her lips but complied, returning moments later with a sealed envelope and a register of the estate documents. You can check them out at the library, she said. Holmes bowed his thanks. And Miss Bancroft? She has taken up residence in the East Wing. She often retreats there in times of distress. When she left, Holmes turned to me, his eyes shining. We are no longer in the realm of speculation, Watson. Someone in this house has been tampering with the truth, and I suspect the motive is as old as Cain. Greed? Or its cousin, inheritance. We entered the library, its tall shelves casting long shadows across the desk. Holmes tore the seal from the envelope and examined the will. Here, he said, the key clause. To Miss Violet Bancroft, upon her marriage or at the age of 30, shall pass the right and title to the Ferndale estate, provided that no scandal of a public nature shall attach to her name. I blinked. That's a curious stipulation. Indeed, it invites coercion. We sat in silence, the weight of the words crashing down on us. Watson, Holmes said quietly, what if Violet discovered the clause and someone threatened to fabricate a scandal to disinherit her, so she would have a motive? Or someone else, knowing she was going to inherit, may have wanted her removed from her heir status altogether. My eyes fell on the initials again, VB, MMJC, and one name is missing, Crane's doesn't list. The one he never imagined he would suspect. Holmes raised his head abruptly. We need to speak to Merriweather immediately. The next morning, Holmes and I travelled by rental car to the nearby village of Dunscombe, where the office of Martin Merriweather, solicitor to the late Lord Ferndale, occupied a modest brick building nestled between a tobacconist and a stationery store. A sign above the entrance bore the words Merriweather and Sons, though Holmes had already assured me that there were no sons, only a once aspiring dynasty, now reduced to a solitary, meticulous man. The interior of the lawyer's office was appropriately musty, the air redolent of old paper and candle wax. A stout clerk looked up from behind a ledger, and upon hearing Holmes's name, ushered us quickly through a heavy walnut door into a smaller room where Merriweather sat at a desk, his fingers ink-stained and his expression tense with annoyance. He stood up, dusting off his waistcoat. Mr. Holmes, I can't pretend to be surprised. News travels fast in Dunscombe, especially when it concerns Ferndale House. Holmes inclined his head. And yet, Mr. Merriweather, I imagine the news of a body discovered under a flower bed in a greenhouse still finds a way to unsettle even a seasoned legal mind. Merriweather gestured stiffly. Please sit down. I assume you've come for Lord Ferndale's estate. We are dealing with a deception, Mr. Merriweather, said Holmes, settling into the offered chair, of which there may be more than one variety in play. The lawyer's brow furrowed. Do you suspect fraud? Holmes crossed his fingers. Tell me. Lord Ferndale died in circumstances deemed natural, and yet now we discover a second corpse, deliberately hidden on the very spot where his own body was found. This coincidence pushes the bounds of probability. Merryweather's lips twitched. I admit it's an ominous sign, but I have no knowledge of this second death. I'm a lawyer, Mr. Holmes, not a detective. Indeed, Holmes said neutrally. But as a lawyer, you were aware of Lord Ferndale's last wishes. I have read the last will, the one dated the year before his death. However, I understand there were discussions about changing it. Merryweather shifted uncomfortably. There were drafts. Lord Ferndale was a hesitant man. He would request several changes, but never fully commit to any. He would summon me to the estate, propose changes, and then abandon them the following week. What kind of changes? I asked. The main revision, Merryweather replied, was to grant Miss Violet Bancroft full possession of Ferndale upon his death, without condition. The existing will only grants her a share upon her marriage or her 30th year, and even then with that unusual clause about scandal. He wanted that removed. And that was the case? No. We never finalized the review. He kept delaying. He said he wanted to speak with Violet first, to assess her readiness. He died before doing so. Holmes looked at him silently for a moment. You understand, Mr. Merryweather, that your name appears in the notes of a now dead man. One Marshall Crane, a man who carried a ledger documenting meetings with you, Miss Bancroft, and others. A man who was later buried beneath the floor of a sealed greenhouse. Merryweather paled. I don't know the name, I swear. Holmes handed him the notebook, open to the now familiar page. Perhaps the dates will jog your memory. The lawyer took the register and scanned it. December 12th. I was at Ferndale's that day. Yes, I remember. Lord Ferndale had summoned me again, but I didn't meet anyone else. Neither Miss Bancroft nor this Crane. Holmes said nothing. Merryweather looked up. If anyone met under my name, I assure you I had no part in it. An impostor? I suggested. Or, Holmes murmured, someone used his name as a decoy. Crane may have thought he was meeting the lawyer, when in fact it was someone else. Merryweather looked between us, his confidence wavering. I keep records, Mr. Holmes. I can show you my ledger from that day. Do it, said Holmes, and your travel arrangements too. The man stood up, walked over to a cabinet and unlocked a drawer. He took out a thin, leather-bound journal, quickly, flipping through the pages. There. December 12th. Appointment with Lord Ferndale at 2 o'clock. I arrived just before, had tea with Mrs. Armitage while waiting, and left at 4 o'clock. The logs at Dunscombe Station will confirm the time of my return. Holmes accepted the register and studied the neat script. Very well, you may be right. But tell me, has Miss Bancroft ever approached you privately, about the will or anything else? Merryweather hesitated. Only once, a month before she died. She asked if her uncle had included her in his affairs. She was discreet, but I sensed she was afraid of being left out. Did she mention the clause? She had found an old draft. I think it alarmed her. Holmes stood up. You've been helpful, Mr. Merryweather, but this case depends less on what people did than on what they hid. I recommend you stay nearby. Scotland Yard will contact you. We took our leave soon after, and as we emerged into the cool afternoon, I noticed that Holmes's pace had increased. His mind, clearly, was beginning to coalesce the scattered fragments into shape. He only spoke when we were far from the village. Merryweather isn't a killer, he said. He's a paper wrestler, not a schemer. But someone used his name, perhaps to gain Crane's trust, perhaps to lead him into a trap. Could Violet have done it? Unlikely. She had no reason to impersonate the lawyer, but she might know who did it. We returned to Ferndale just before dusk, the light fading behind the trees and the air bitter with the impending frost. Holmes headed straight for the east wing, where Violet Bancroft had retired the day before. She welcomed us into a small parlor adorned with heavy curtains and faded portraits. "I didn't expect to see you so soon," she said calmly. "I regret this imposition, Miss Bancroft," Holmes replied, "but I need your candor. Have you met Marshal Crane?" There was a pause, barely a flicker, but unmistakable. "I didn't know his name," she said, "but I was approached once by a man who claimed to work for the estate." What did he want? To talk about the will. He implied there were changes, that I could be excluded if I didn't act. He was intelligent, never directly threatening, but insistent. "When was that?" She looked away. "Mid-December. The 12th, maybe." Holmes leaned forward. "Did you go to the meeting?" "I did, near the orchard. He never came home. He gave me a sealed envelope, told me to read it and decide if I should act. I never opened it. Why not? I was scared. I thought it might be a fake or blackmail. Where is the envelope now?" She hesitated, then went to a drawer in the sideboard. She returned with a yellowing envelope sealed with red wax. Holmes examined it, then carefully pocketed it. "One more question," he said. "Have you spoken to anyone about the meeting?" "Person. He bowed slightly. "Thank you, Miss Bancroft. You have been very helpful." Outside, I turned to Holmes. "What do you think the letter contains? Proof of forgery, perhaps, or a threat? Either way, Crane miscalculated. He believed knowledge would protect him. But knowledge, Watson, is only as secure as the mind that holds it. What if someone else knew the letter? Then they would do whatever was necessary to prevent its delivery." We returned to Holmes's temporary quarters, where he carefully opened the seal and removed a folded sheet of paper. As his eyes scanned the contents, his eyebrows lowered. "Good?" I asked. He gave me the note. He said in spider writing, "The clause is false. A substitute will exist. Merriweather was not present when it was signed. If you want the truth, meet me in the greenhouse. Midnight." No signature, no address, but the date at the bottom chilled me, December 13th. "The night Crane died," I said. Holmes looked at the fire. "And the night someone silenced the gardener who bloomed too early." Back at Ferndale House, the atmosphere had grown noticeably heavier, as if the very walls felt the unfolding of long-buried secrets. Snow now clung to the iron gates and roofs. The grounds enveloped in an eerie silence, broken only by the distant cawing of crows circling the hard branches of the orchard. Holmes had retired to the study, where Miss Bancroft's recovered letter lay flat on the desk, under a magnifying glass and a series of light sources he had improvised from 2 oil lamps and a crystal decanter. I watched from the corner, notebook in hand, as he examined the paper inch by inch, his brow furrowed, his pipe forgotten on the table beside him. "The hand is clever," he murmured. "See how the ink bleeds slightly at the top lines? Someone who isn't used to writing with this particular the pen was probably borrowed or recently purchased." I leaned forward. "Can you tell who wrote it?" "Not yet," replied Holmes, "but note the slant to the left, which is not typical of men, and the peculiar way the lowercase letters are written. 'Tis crossed very low. This can be distinctive, but the newspaper style is more revealing. Feel the edge." I ran a finger along the side, rough, fibrous. "Hand cut," I said. "Yes," Holmes replied. "This isn't the kind of stationery you'd find in a lawyer's office. It's domestic. Homemade, probably kept in a personal office. We're not dealing with a professional here. We're dealing with someone inside Ferndale, or someone close enough to know his routines." He moved away from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered garden. "The letter was intended as a decoy, Watson. Crane was summoned under the illusion of truth and trust. Midnight in the greenhouse was a perfect trap. What if Violet had left instead of her? Holmes gave a slight smile. Then I think we would have found his body in the ground instead of Crane's. I shivered, not from cold. Someone knew Crane was getting too close, that he was threatening to reveal the forgery, or whatever truth lay behind the clause in the will. That person had to stop him. Permanently. A light knock interrupted us. Mrs. Armitage entered, carrying a silver tray filled with tea, though her hands weren't as steady as usual. She set it down carefully. "I've come with an update, Mr. Holmes," she said softly. "The maid Elsa reports that one of Miss Bancroft's gloves is missing. A left-hand glove, velvet, pale grey. She noticed it was missing after Miss Bancroft returned from her walk this morning." Holmes turned slowly. "And you thought that was important?" His eyes turned to me, then back to Holmes. "Because I found a glove earlier today, discarded in the ashtray behind the garden shed." Holmes's posture stiffened. "And where is he now?" "I kept it. I had a feeling." She reached into her apron and pulled out a small package wrapped in a scarf. Carefully unfolding it, she revealed a glove on her left hand, damp, soot-stained and torn at the thumb. Holmes accepted it respectfully and placed it beside the letter. He sniffed inside. Charcoal, earth, and something else. He held it under the lamp. "Watson?" I took another step. "Quicklime," I said. "Same trace we found in the greenhouse soil." Holmes nodded. "Our murderer wore gloves when handling the body, but the glove tore, exposing the skin to lime-scale burns. Painful but manageable, unless someone notices the injury." He turned to Mrs. Armitage. "Has anyone in the house reported an injury to you recently? A burn, a cut, perhaps?" The housekeeper hesitated. "No, but yesterday Violet asked Elsa for some ointment. She said she had chilblains developing on her left hand." Holmes's eyes darkened. "Watson," he said, "we need to speak to Miss Bancroft again." We found Violet in the music room, sitting at the old upright piano. Her fingers trailed over the keys but produced no sound. She looked up as we entered, her expression unreadable. "Miss Bancroft," said Holmes calmly, "one of your gloves was found behind the garden shed, soiled with quicklime and ash. Might you know how it came to be there?" She froze. "No, I must have dropped it." "In the ashtray?" "I don't know." "And your hand?" asked Holmes. "You asked for some ointment. May I see it?" His composure was shattered. "I burned him a little. I slipped. On the path grazed a stone gate. It's nothing serious." Holmes took a step forward. "I must insist. Let me see." She stood up slowly and held out her hand. The burn was there, reddened, slightly blistered along the knuckles and the base of her thumb. "Miss Bancroft," said Holmes gently, "why didn't you tell me you had seen Crane?" Again her lips parted. "I didn't. I told you I never opened the letter. You opened it later, or someone did. But he didn't go back to London, did he? He came back. You went to the greenhouse that night, not him." "No," she whispered. "No, I—" Holmes's voice was firm, but not unkind. "Tell us the truth. All of it." She sank slowly into the piano stool, her shoulders trembling. "I followed him," she said finally. "I read the letter the next morning. It terrified me. I didn't know what it meant. If I was being framed, blackmailed, I had to know who he was. I went to the greenhouse that evening." "Have you met him?" I saw that someone was already there. A man. It wasn't Crane, it was—" The door burst open, and Edwin Talmadge entered, cap in hand, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Excuse me, gentlemen, but there's something I think you should see." The greenhouse, now a place of quiet terror, greeted us again with its stifling heat. Talmadge led us not to the back where the body had been discovered, but to a side bench along the roof frame where tools and supplies were stored. There, wrapped in burlap and hidden under a potting shelf, was a second glove matching the first. But beside it, more damningly, were a pocket knife with a broken hinge and a linen handkerchief, lightly stained with rusty red spots. Holmes got it back. "Initials," he whispered. "M.M. Merriweather," I said. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Or someone who wanted us to believe that was the case." He turned to Talmadge. "Who else came here today?" "No one, sir, I swear. The place has been locked since you last arrived." "Then the objects were placed earlier, either before our arrival or during Crane's burial." Holmes stood motionless, processing. Then, turning to us, his tone changed, clipped, forceful. "Watson, we must request Lestrade's presence. Immediately." "Did you solve it?" I asked. "I've almost baited the trap," said Holmes. "And I believe our murderer, whether male or female, is about to walk straight into it." It was almost midnight when Holmes put his plan into action. Ferndale House was plunged into a silence so profound that the crackle of frost forming along. The window panes could be heard. The snow had stopped, but a thin fog clung to the ground, curling along the gravel paths and orchard walks like a ghost seeking its grave. Lestrade had arrived from London a few hours earlier, summoned by a discreet telegram Holmes had sent late that afternoon. Though bristling with his usual impatience, he had accepted Holmes's instructions without protest, attracted by the peculiarity of the case and the tacit promise of a dramatic revelation. We gathered in the darkness of the greenhouse at the very heart of the mystery. The place had been cleared of tools and debris, except for the flower bed where Marshal Crane's body had been dug up and the blooming camellia that still stood sentinel above it. Holmes moved through the space with an eerie calm, placing a single oil lamp on a crate at the far end and extinguishing all the others. The resulting gloom was thick and unsettling. "Lestrade," Holmes said quietly, "you and Watson will remain, hidden near the entrance. I will take up position behind the ivy curtain at the rear." "And the suspect?" Lestrade asked, his breath steaming in the cold air. "It will come, if my bait is sufficient. I have made it known, through Mrs. Armitage, that I have discovered decisive evidence implicating a will forger, and that I intend to hand it over to the authorities this morning. That will be enough to shake our culprit." He straightened the cuff of his shirt with quiet deliberation. "They killed once. If they feel truly threatened, they might be desperate enough to act again." "What if no one comes?" I asked. Holmes offered, a slight smile. "Then I'll enjoy an unusually wet midnight vigil. But I believe our gardener's bloom isn't the only thing this winter determined to rise early." We took our seats, and silence fell. Time moved with agonizing slowness. The ticking of my pocket watch became thunderous in my ears, echoing second by second the tension in my chest. Lestrade crouched beside me, his revolver holstered but ready. Holmes had disappeared into the shadows, invisible but undoubtedly alert. Then a creak of footsteps, soft, hesitant, but real. They approached, stopping once, perhaps to glance behind them, then moved on. The latch on the greenhouse door turned. A figure entered. I recognized the figure immediately. Not Violet Bancroft, nor the hunched figure of Merriweather. It was Edwin Talmadge. He moved slowly, cautiously, his head swaying. From side to side, his hand slipped into his coat and traced something small, metallic. A knife. He approached the crate with the oil lamp, reached underneath. Then he turned abruptly, as if expecting someone to be waiting for him. Holmes's voice echoed in the darkness. Behind him. "Are you looking for this?" Talmadge turned. The knife shot upward, but Holmes was quicker. With one fluid movement, he brought the blade down and pushed the gardener back against the crate. Lestrade lunged forward, revolver drawn, and I followed close behind. Talmadge struggled, then froze as the muzzle of Lestrade's revolver pressed against his temple. "It's over," Holmes said quietly. He no longer wanted to fight. He fell to his knees, the knife falling to the ground. I didn't mean to kill him," Talmadge grumbled. "He wouldn't leave him alone. He threatened everything," Lestrade snapped. The handcuffs and pulled him to his feet. "I think we'll hear your story now," Holmes said. Talmadge was trembling. The mask of quiet servitude had long since vanished from his face. He looked at Holmes with something between hatred and weary resignation. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way. I just wanted what was due to me." "Start at the beginning," Holmes advised. "I served this house for 30 years. I saw it rot from the inside out. Lord Ferndale, he was no saint. He played favourites, dangled promises. He promised me, that when he changed the will I would receive a piece of land, the gardener's cottage, my job assured for life. He said I was the only one he could trust." "And then?" I asked. "Then he died," Talmadge said, bitterly, "and the will never changed. I was left with nothing, no explanation, no papers, just a locked greenhouse and growing suspicions." Holmes watched him carefully. "And Marshal Crane?" "I didn't know his name at the time. He came sniffing around a few weeks later. He said he had proof the will had been changed. He said I'd been deceived, just like him. But he lied. He wanted money. He said he'd sell the letter back to Miss Bancroft unless someone paid him." "And you decided to silence him?" Talmadge looked down. "He arranged to meet someone in the greenhouse. I knew because I found his note. He dropped it in the garden path. I went instead. I confronted him. I told him to leave, but he laughed. He said he had copies. He said everything he knew was written down. We struggled. I grabbed a shovel. I didn't want to—" He stopped. "You buried it there," Holmes said. "And you didn't burn the glove. You panicked." Talmadge nodded slowly. "I tried using quicklime to speed up the decomposition. I thought it would mask the smell. I didn't expect—" "The flower to bloom." Holmes shook his head slightly. "Nature does not brook dissimulation, Mr. Talmadge. And it was your past error of judgment that finally betrayed you." Lestrade started to lead the man away, but Talmadge turned to Holmes, a last glimmer of defiance in his eyes. "Ferndale lied. To everyone, not just me. He played lawyer, niece, estate, kept all the power and none of the honor. You may have your culprit, Mr. Holmes, but don't confuse justice with righteousness." Then he disappeared, swallowed up by the dark path that led back to the manor. Holmes was silent for a long moment, then turned to me. "That's fine," he said finally. "Motivation, opportunity, method. But there's still a common thread." I followed, his gaze to the camellia, still in bloom despite everything. What thread? Why the will was never changed. Later in the office, Holmes confronted Merriweather again. The lawyer, awakened from a late dinner, blinked sleepily as Holmes laid out the facts. Talmadge thought Ferndale had promised him an amendment. Crane had proof, yet the document was never filed. "I told you," Merriweather said. "We never finished it." Holmes narrowed his eyes. "And yet I believe you did. You simply chose not to. Submit it." Merriweather stiffened. "This is outrageous." "Is it?" Holmes retorted. "You were in danger of losing your influence. Ferndale wanted the scandal clause removed, and power transferred directly to Miss Bancroft. Perhaps you didn't agree. Perhaps you thought Violet was too young, too vulnerable. I did what I thought was right. So you buried the revision in a drawer and left the Old Testament in place. You didn't forge anything, but you hid everything." Merriweather's silence was answer enough. Holmes turned away. "There are many forms of treason, Watson," he said softly. "Some wear gloves, others wear ink. I closed my notebook, the page almost full, and Violette, I asked. "What's happening to her?" "She's inheriting now," Holmes said, "and perhaps—" With fewer illusions, the fire in the fireplace crackled faintly. Outside, the first rays of morning touched the golden horizon, another closed case, and beneath the glass roof of a quiet greenhouse, a winter flower was still in bloom, its petals bright, its deeply hidden roots now brought to light. The events of that long night had finally given way to a fragile morning, and the sun, though pale, shone on Ferndale House with an almost ironic brilliance. Snow glittered on the rooftops and hedges, as if nature had attempted to soften the weight of the truth with a layer of glittering amnesia. Yet within the manor, no one had forgotten. Talmadge had been arrested at dawn, transported under Lestrade's discreet supervision to London for formal questioning. No announcement was made at the house. Holmes insisted on discretion until all aspects of the case had been explained. I couldn't help feeling a certain unease as I watched the car disappear down the drive, the gardener's hunched figure framed in the frosted glass like a man disappearing into a tomb of his own making. Yet, despite the clarity of his confession, Holmes remained unusually thoughtful. "You're troubled," I remarked as we returned to the library, where the envelope Violet had returned still lay on the desk, next to the soot-stained glove and the wilted flower Holmes had picked before dawn. He didn't deny it. Talmadge's confession was genuine, but something remains unspoken, something beneath the surface. His motives were anger, resentment, fear, but the sequence of events still arouses unease. "Do you think there's another accomplice?" I asked. "Not necessarily." He tapped his fingers together. "But I believe the truth, as we currently understand it, is incomplete." I sat down, pen in hand. "So where do I start?" Holmes rummaged in his coat and produced a second letter, thinner than the first, recently opened and faintly scented. "This arrived an hour ago," he said. "Addressed to me, left anonymously in my room. No handwriting on the outside, no signature on the inside." He handed it to me. The contents were brief. "I didn't kill him, but I saw him die. I have not told you everything, Mr. Holmes, not out of guilt, but out of shame. There are things a woman cannot admit in broad daylight, but in silence I have suffered enough. Let him take the blame if he must, but know that I will carry the truth forever." There was no name, but I recognized the elegant and understated script. "Violet," I said softly. Holmes nodded. "And here, Watson, lies the fault line. She claims not to have killed Crane, but she admits to having been present. And not only that, she implies that she saw Talmadge in action. If so, why wait to confess? And why leave a man hanging during the whole act?" "She said it was a shame," I replied. "But ashamed of what?" Holmes said nothing, but his gaze turned again to the letter. "Let us walk, Watson. I believe the morning air and the long shadows of Ferndale can loosen tongues still closed by darkness." We found Miss Bancroft sitting alone on a bench near the orchard, her coat pulled tightly around her, her gaze lost somewhere beyond the trees. She was not surprised by our approach, but simply folded her gloved hands in her lap and looked up with an expression of weary determination. "I was wondering when you would come," she said. Holmes bowed slightly. "Miss Bancroft, you have always seemed to me to be a woman with a measured, quiet, hidden inner world. But silence, when kept too long, becomes a kind of deception." She looked down. "You got my note?" "Yes. And I must ask you directly, did you witness the murder of Edwin Talmadge?" She nodded once. "I arrived late, too late. I never intended to go. I was terrified. But the fear of what that man might reveal about my uncle was stronger than caution." "What did you see?" "I saw them arguing. Crane had a paper in his hand, a copy of the clause, I think. He was yelling. Talmadge hit him with a shovel. Once. Crane fell, he didn't move. And you, I turned and ran. I didn't scream, I didn't run for help. I told myself I hadn't seen enough to do anything, but I had. I told myself it wasn't my business, but it was. I didn't say anything because I was ashamed. I was ashamed that I had stood there and let it happen. Holmes's voice, when it was heard, was not cold but grave. And the glove? She closed her eyes. I dropped it that night. I must have grazed the floor when I turned around. I didn't know it was torn. By the time I realized it, the damage was done. You could have saved him, Holmes said. Yes. Her voice trembled. But I didn't. This is what I'm going to wear. We were silent for a long time. The wind blew gently through the bare orchard, rustling, the last frozen leaves. Finally, Holmes said, Talmadge will be tried, but I believe your conscience has already imposed your sentence on you. I will not insist on a statement unless you wish to make one. Violet looked at him, her eyes glassy but dry. Will it matter? Holmes replied, To justice? Perhaps not. But to you, it's already done. She stood up slowly and walked back towards the house without another word. That evening, Holmes and I sat once more before the library fire, its glow dancing around the edges of the papers, notes and remnants of the case now drawing to a close. She didn't lie out of malice, I said finally. No, Holmes agreed. But dissembling isn't always born of guilt. Sometimes it's the instinct of the wounded to hide the cruelty of the world. He grabbed his pipe and lit it, the smoke curling like a question mark. I often wonder, Watson, he thought, how many truths remain buried not by intention but by fear. How many witnesses convince themselves that silence is a virtue? Do you think we haven't discovered everything? We've uncovered enough for justice to prevail, but as for the root of the problem, well, that's something justice rarely touches. I let the words sit between us, the fire crackling in agreement. Outside, Ferndale slept, his secrets revealed, his guilt exhumed. Yet in the recesses of its great halls and snowy walkways, I was certain there remained a few whispers, caught between memory and regret. As we prepared to leave the next day, I caught one last glimpse of the greenhouse. The camellia was still, standing, now slightly drooping, its season drawing to a close. A timeless bloom born of death and guilt but without fault in itself, just like the young woman who had seen it bloom. It was 3 days after our departure from Ferndale House that we found ourselves back in the familiar surroundings of Baker Street. The fog had returned in force to London, hugging the cobblestones and windows like a living shroud. Holmes had resumed his usual posture in the armchair by the fire, his violin untouched, his pipe extinguished, and his gaze fixed not on any particular object, but somewhere far beyond the confines of the drawing-room. I had tried, without success, to engage in a light conversation with him, offering him the newspaper, some cognac, and even a case of theft reported in the Times involving a sapphire that had vanished from a jewelry display. None drew more than a slight lift of the eyebrow. I knew he was still sifting through Ferndale's ashes, not for facts, but for meaning. It was shortly before noon when there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with a single envelope. Postmarked Surrey. There was no return address, only the name Sherlock Holmes written in fine, deliberate handwriting. Holmes took the envelope, studied it for no more than a second, then opened it slowly. A folded sheet of paper fell into his lap, accompanied by a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. He said nothing, but his hand closed around the object as he read. I leaned forward, my curiosity piqued. Good? I asked. Holmes looked up. It seems, Watson, that the dead have a curious way of rearranging their affairs posthumously. He passed me the letter. To Mr. Sherlock Holmes, if you're reading this, I'm probably no longer among the living. This letter has been entrusted to my lawyer to be sent in case of certain contingencies, chief among them, my untimely death without a clear legal resolution. You can judge me harshly. I won't argue. I lived as a man of contradictions. I had the truth in one hand and the secret in the other, and I often chose the latter, especially when it came to family. By now you will have discovered the matter of my revised will. I intended to leave Ferndale entirely to my niece, Violet. Not necessarily because she deserved it, but because she was the only one who didn't ask for anything. However, I didn't trust the instruments of the law to guarantee this result, nor did I trust Merriweather to bring it about under pressure from outside influence. Therefore I made another copy, a personal will, hidden in a place where only someone truly familiar with the estate could find it. This note contains the key. Be careful, Gregory Ferndale. The cloth-wrapped object, now unwrapped in Holmes's hand, was a small, ornate but worn brass key. A label affixed to it bore a single word, observatory. I looked up in confusion. Ferndale had an observatory. Holmes's smile returned, the faintest ghost of its usual sparkle. Indeed, a structure attached to the west wing, abandoned for years according to Miss Bancroft, but evidently not as forgotten as we were led to believe. He stood up and walked over to the fireplace, tapping the key thoughtfully against his palm. We're returning to Surrey, Watson, immediately. We arrived in Ferndale at dusk the next evening. Violet Bancroft greeted us in the lobby, her surprise tempered by something remarkably like relief. I thought the matter was over, she said quietly. So will I, replied Holmes, until your uncle delivers a final message from beyond the grave. She paled slightly when he showed her the key and the letter. Did he write to you? He anticipated uncertainty, and perhaps that the truth might still be buried, intentionally or not. She didn't say anything more, but signaled for us to follow her. The observatory turned out to be a squat stone structure, attached to the western edge of the manor. Ivy had grown over the exterior walls, and its domed roof showed signs of disrepair. The air inside was dry and stale, filled with dust particles and a faint smell of aged varnish. The large telescope in the center remained dormant, wrapped in canvas. Holmes walked to the far wall where a row of cabinets lined the interior. After testing 3 locks, he inserted the brass key into a small drawer set into the woodwork of the wall. It turned with a click. Inside was a single document, yellowed but intact, folded and sealed with the Ferndale coat of arms. Holmes carefully withdrew it. The true final testament, he whispered. He quickly examined its contents. Then he turned to Violet. He names you as sole heir unconditionally. The scandal clause is removed. The estate, the house, and its assets are to be placed in your unconditional custody. She inhaled sharply. Then the previous one will be replaced once this one is submitted to the court. It is attested by 2 staff members, one deceased, the other long retired. But both signatures are verifiable. And Talmadge? She asked softly. Holmes's gaze softened. His actions remain reprehensible, but I see now why he felt betrayed. Your uncle, in his attempts at secrecy, left the faithful in the dark. And ignorance, Watson, breeds resentment far faster than the truth. We left the observatory in silence. The stars above had begun to pierce the veil of night, and a light wind whistled across the grounds. Back in the study, Holmes folded the new will and placed it in an envelope addressed to the Surrey County Probate Office. He sealed it with wax and pressed it into Violet's hands. Justice is not only served by the courts, he said. Sometimes it ends up in ink, in decisions made when no one is watching. She looked at him then, really, and for the first time, I saw gratitude flicker across her expression unaccompanied by sorrow. Thank you, she said, for discovering what neither of us wanted to face. "It is never a pleasure," replied Holmes. "Only a duty." On the train back to London, the next morning, I found Holmes in one of his rare moods of thoughtful calm. The countryside rolled past our window, the fields shimmering with frost, the trees etched like skeletons against the pale sky. After a while, I said, "Do you think Violet will be a good steward of the estate?" "I believe," Holmes said slowly, "that she now has the opportunity to be one. And perhaps that is the best any of us can hope for, a chance to write a better ending than others have written for us. Hey, Ferndale." He turned to the window. "He will outlive them all, the gardener, the niece, the lawyer, and even the detective. But his soil has now been turned, the dead have been exhumed, and in their place something new might yet take root. I then closed my notebook, not out of fatigue, but out of a sense of closure. Outside, the sun was finally breaking through the clouds, casting a golden light onto the railway tracks ahead, a light that shone unhindered through every mist, every secret, every glass greenhouse still standing in winter. It was a week after our final departure from Ferndale House that I found Holmes in an unusually contemplative mood. The case had been officially closed, the revised will submitted, and Talmadge was in custody, awaiting trial for manslaughter. Violet Bancroft, now mistress of the estate, had written Holmes a brief but kind note, thanking him not only for uncovering the truth, but also for what she called a measured mercy in the face of merciless facts. Holmes read the letter once, and put it away without comment. Since our return, he had largely withdrawn into his inner sanctum, occupying himself with chemical analyses, long walks in Hyde Park, and, when he thought I wasn't looking, quiet hours with his violin playing. Strange, fractured melodies that seemed to begin in grief and end in uncertainty. It was on such a grey afternoon that I finally addressed the question that had lingered like smoke since the first flower had emerged from the ground. "What troubles you about?" "Ferndale, Holmes? The case has been solved, justice has been set in motion, and yet you persist in circling the subject in your mind like a hawk over a silent field." He was sitting in his armchair, a volume of Goethe Faustun opened on his knees. At my words, he did not speak immediately, but exhaled slowly, his fingers curled in front of him. "There are some cases, Watson," he said finally, "that resolve themselves like clockwork, a neat pattern, a logical chain, a villain to be exposed. And then there are other, like Ferndale, where the truth, though discovered, remains muddled, not for lack of evidence, but for human frailty." I sat down opposite him, my notebook balanced on my lap. "Are you talking about Miss Bancroft?" "Partly." He looked at me, not with that sharp glint of revelation I'd grown accustomed to, but with something quieter, almost melancholy. "She didn't lie, Watson. Not in the traditional way, but she chose silence. She saw a man die and said, 'Nothing. Because her own future depended on it, that's not criminal.' But is it right?" I didn't answer. I suspected he didn't want it. "She was, in many ways," he continued, "the most honest figure in this house. She played no games, she made no claims, yet the weight she carried was the heaviest of all. And I wonder if that kind of burden ever lifts, even after the inheritance papers are signed." "And Ferndale himself?" I asked. "Was he the manipulator they believed him to be?" Holmes gave a rare shrug. "I think Lord Ferndale was a man at war with himself. He tried to maintain control of his inheritance beyond the grave. But in doing so, he sowed the seeds of deception. He fully trusted no one, not even the lawyer who wanted to carry out his wishes. His last letter proves it." I thought back to the camellia, the rare flower that had started it all, rising from the poisoned earth like the ghost of something once beautiful. "Do you think," I said slowly, "that the flower was a sign of guilt? Or a coincidence?" Holmes smiled, weakly. Nature doesn't conspire, Watson, but it does bear witness to it. Cranes thought he could hide in the one place no one would dare disturb, the scene of an ancient death. But life refused to cooperate. It flourished, as life always does, inconveniently and without regard to our intentions. He paused. A gardener should have known. There was a long silence filled only by the soft ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the city outside our window. Then Holmes leaned forward. Do you know what stayed with me the most? Not the letter, not the glove, not even the discovery of the second will. I shook my head. It was the fact that Violet was returning to the greenhouse the day after we left. Mrs. Hudson told me she had received a parcel, soiled with dirt and wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was the camellia, cut and pressed. Did she send it to you? Yes. With a note. Some things shouldn't have grown, but they did. I looked at him. A confession? Maybe. Or a blessing. It's hard to say with people like her. Holmes then got up, agitated, and went to the window. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, fine, delicate, and relentless. The streets of London disappeared beneath him, washed clean for a day. When I was younger, he said softly, I believed that deduction could solve everything, that logic was a lantern bright enough to banish every shadow, but I see now that there are corners of the human heart where light simply doesn't reach. And you regret it? I asked. No, he replied, but I respect him. He turned away from the window and picked up the violin. This time he didn't play broken notes, but a deep, sonorous melody that filled the room like a warm fog. It was a lament, I think, though it contained something close to hope. I let the music carry me back, through the frozen greenhouse, the echo of Crane's warning footsteps, the soot-stained glove, the whisper of Ferndale's will, and the quiet voice of a woman alone in an orchard, admitting what even the law couldn't touch. In the end, justice didn't arrive with a flourish, with no trial, no triumphant final blow. It had fallen apart, a buried letter, a winter flower, a broken silence. And perhaps that was the best the world had to offer. That evening, as I completed my notes, I turned once more to the last page with a single sentence, a sentence that seemed to rise from the whole affair like steam from a freshly turned grave. It was not a murder case nor an inheritance case, but a case of silence, and the price paid by those who tend it like a garden in winter. I closed the notebook, placed it by the fireplace, and looked up at Holmes. He had returned to the window, watching the snow fall, and I knew that somewhere beneath the frost something invisible was preparing to bloom again,